Hi. So we've done several videos where we've walked through submission of samples and so forth with the Syncfusion Big Data environment, and also looked at managing the environment that's installed locally. So in this video, I'm going to actually walk through and connect to a cluster, a real several node cluster basically, and interact with it in pretty much the same manner as we would interact with a local pseudonode cluster basically. So the first thing is I'm going to launch the cluster manager, which I've already installed on my machine, and it's going to come up with a browser-based UI. Now the cluster manager itself, just to point out, it runs locally on my machine. Whether it's actually connecting to a remote cluster or not, the cluster manager itself is running within a website that's served from my machine basically. So I'm just going to log in, and I have two clusters that are configured. So one is my local host, my pseudo cluster, which is running on my laptop, and I see that here I have one data node, and I also have a remote cluster configured, which has 7 data nodes, and then it has 2 name nodes for high availability. And once you set up a cluster with a separate name node and several data nodes, adding it to your own management interface is very simple. You just click add, give it a friendly name. In my case, I called it remote, and then the IP or host name of the name node on your network. And that's all it's going to take to add it. So I can drill down and look at the remote cluster here, and look at all the nodes, look at jobs that are running or have been submitted and so forth basically. So I'm just going to take a quick run through of this. So you can see that the status of all my nodes. These are the 2 name nodes. There's one name node here, and then there's another one that's a backup or to enable high availability. And there's also I have a monitoring tab where I can go in and actually look at the status of each of the nodes, what's running on them, and so forth basically. There's also another tab where I can obtain job details on the cluster, so I can see all the jobs that I've run here. I see that some jobs succeeded, and I see another job here that failed. I can navigate through and look at the logs and so forth. I also have a Oozie management environment, which we will talk about in a later video basically. So this is just a quick look at the cluster that we have connected. It also shows that I have 7 nodes and about 150 gigabytes of memory on all those nodes together basically. So that's a quick look at the cluster manager connected to a remote cluster. One other thing that I should point out is that there is a admin UI, which we will look at in more detail later, but you can do backup and restore operations. There's also a Python package manager, which lets you roll out your own packages across the cluster. So if you have a package that is not shipped as part of the standard install, then it's very easy. You don't have to go in and actually update each node. The cluster manager will be able to do it for you. You just point it to the package that you need, or if you want to uninstall it or upgrade, then you can do all those things. Again, we'll walk through that later. You can manage nodes and do all the normal administration tasks right from within the cluster manager basically. So that's a quick look there. Now let's go back to our studio environment. So as you will recollect, we can look at samples. We can work with the cluster that we have locally using the studio environment. Now, if I'm done with development, say, and I want to actually work with the live production cluster, or I'm working with a cluster to submit a large job, then I don't have to go to another UI. There's no context switch here. I can simply go home here, and then I have a cluster that I already set up, and it's just a question of adding the name node there basically, the IP or the LAN DNS name, and then I can simply select that and say I want to now connect to this cluster. So you can see that this is the cluster that we browsed a minute ago using the cluster manager, and this is the name node's DNS name, It says that it's a cluster with 7 nodes, and this is the total available memory and so forth, the number of containers that are running at the moment, and so forth. So I can actually go in and now connect to this cluster. It will take a few seconds to connect. It'll switch to that context. So still connecting. It's detected that the server is active, and now it's connected. So now I'm actually physically connected to that cluster. I'm no longer connected to my pseudo cluster. So we can see this, we can observe it here. It says I'm connected to a Hadoop instance running on this IP, internal IP that I have for the name node of my cluster. This is just the friendly name that I gave it. I could have given another name, but that's what it is. And then I can look at the HDFS data. It's substantially the same as what you would see in a pseudonode cluster, because we ship the exact same samples with the production installation also, or with the cluster, true cluster installation. So you can navigate to all the tabs, and you can do all the same things that you do with the local cluster. So I'm just going to run a job. I'm going to just pick the first job on the Spark page. I have the Spark context available and loaded, so I can go ahead and execute this. The only difference from earlier videos is that this is now running on my cluster, basically, the 9-node cluster, 7 data nodes and a name node, and backup high availability name node. So this was completed. I can look at data output here. I can go back to the editor and work with it. So this is very convenient because you can actually take a subset of the data, work with your local pseudonode cluster, do all your debugging, and once you have it down and you want to run it on a larger data set on the cluster, using the leveraging the resources of the cluster, you can very easily switch, connect to that cluster, and then run and work with it that way. So hopefully that was useful. So the whole goal is to really give you a local environment and also a cluster environment, and to make the context switch as seamless as possible, basically. So thank you, and if you have any questions or comments, as usual, please feel free to contact us through our Direct Track support system. Thanks again.